You couldn't possibly have hated Oscar Isaac's prosthetics for X-Men Apocalypse more than him. His costume was so painful he could barely even talk. Meanwhile, Colin Farrell's transformation for the Batman was so complete, you wouldn't recognize him. Even his co-stars thought he was just some scary guy on set. These are the best and worst movie prosthetics. First up in the category of worst, we have Oscar Isaac's prosthetics from X-Men. This look was just so big and bulky, it overshadowed the entire performance. Even Oscar admitted,
"Apocalypse, that was excruciating."
And it was mostly because of the costume. Apparently, Oscar hadn't realized that he was going to be encased in glue, latex, and a 40-pound suit for the role when he signed on. Plus, he had to sit on a specially designed saddle and be rolled into cooling tents between takes.
And so I just wouldn't ever talk to anybody, and I was just gonna be sitting, and I couldn't really move.
Not only could he barely move, but he could barely speak either. The squeaking of the rubber and plastic on his suit meant that everything needed to be redubbed later. You can really see Oscar's discomfort with his costume. Although, uncomfortable costumes don't always spell the death of a performance. Brendan Fraser didn't have the easiest time with his prosthetics in The Whale. He had to wear a full suit that weighed about 200 pounds, heavy enough that when he took it off at the end of the day, he felt completely unsteady. But that being said, Brendan took it all in stride.
It was appropriately cumbersome, should be.
He even said that the prosthetics helped him to develop a better sense of who his character is.
Live the role, let him be a man.
It definitely looks like this could be a real man. And speaks to prosthetic designer Adrian Moreau's desire to give us something with more finesse than anything we've seen in movies before. Now, if Moreau's this good at turning Brendan into a 600-pound man, we wonder if he would have better luck transforming Guy Pearce into a 104-year-old. Guy Pearce thought it was so cool being in the Alien movies.
It wasn't so cool having to wear 5 hours of old age prosthetic makeup.
This makeup looks simply awful, making Guy look like a raisin. Apparently, Ridley Scott originally planned on having moments where Guy would appear young, without prosthetics, but when those scenes were written out, even Guy admits
They could have just cast a 100-year-old guy.
Guy was also forced to wear a sort of metal exoskeleton, which meant I couldn't sit down properly.
I sort of had to sort of just do this and go, let me know when you're ready. Okay.
If you want to avoid waiting around for our next video, then we'd recommend hitting that subscribe button. But the waiting wasn't even the worst part for Guy.
What was more difficult was the hour that it took to get the makeup off.
Well, hey, at least he wasn't almost kicked off set. Now, this makeup was almost too good. The first time Colin Farrell did his full makeup test for the Penguin, he was so completely transformed that makeup designer Mike Marino said nobody'd look at him. They thought, who is this scary guy on set? Colin said hi to Jeffrey Wright.
And he looked at me like he wanted me thrown off the set.
But it all worked out at the end of the day.
And then he went over and I saw him talking to the director, and the director pointed back over here, and then he came back and he was like, Colin?
The entire cast was amazed by just how realistic it looked, which was just what Marino wanted. It took him about 4 hours to apply all those prosthetic pieces, although they managed to get it down to about an hour and a half with practice. Marino tried to keep the silicone layers pretty thin so that Colin would still be able to act through them, a problem Christopher Eccleston knows well. Now, Christopher feels like Marvel lied to him. When he was approached to play Malekith, he was told that there would be a little bit of prosthetics.
And then there was 7 hours of prosthetics, which is a lot more than a little bit.
It may have been worth it if only Christopher were still able to act through heavy makeup. It was just so overpowering, resulting in a flat performance that even Christopher would admit was not my finest moment. Surprisingly enough, the part that he was most upset about was his contact lenses, which he felt made it difficult for him to connect with the audience.
An obstacle between the audience and your eyes is questionable.
But considering even he admits that he's made contact lenses work for him before, we aren't sure we blame this one on the eyes. But maybe he should have taken a page from Jared Leto's page and have his makeup done offset. Al Pacino knows a little something about what Jeffrey Wright went through. Jared Leto would arrange to have his makeup done separate from the House of Gucci set, so that he'd show up to work completely in character. In fact, the first time that Jared met Al, who plays his father in the film, he came up to him like,
Papa, it's me, Paolo.
But there was only one problem. Jared's prosthetics were so convincing, Al had no idea who this crazy guy was.
And he basically shuffled off again. He's like, who's this creep?
Fortunately, someone was around to whisper to poor, confused Al, it's Jared.
And he turned around and he said, "Oh, my son! My son!"
This look is especially impressive when you consider that the prosthetics designer only had 3 weeks to put it all together, and it still wound up looking better than Leonardo DiCaprio's prosthetics in Edgar. So here's a little tip for filmmakers. If you're going to use prosthetics, it's probably best to keep using them. Leonardo DiCaprio had to be aged up using prosthetics for the movie Edgar, but the fact that they kept jumping back and forth between Leo's natural face when he was younger and the prosthetics when he was older made them all the more distracting. Leo had his longtime makeup artist, Sean, work on this look, and even though Leo's been subjected to some very long makeups by him in the past, even Sean would admit that this film is his most challenging. The more pieces of silicone piled onto his face, the more Leo started to feel claustrophobic, and although he tried to use that for the character, there was just no getting around the fact that this was just a bad look. And we don't mean that in the way that the Baron from Dune is bad. To play the Baron, Stellan Skarsgård had to be physically intimidating.
I wanted to feel a menace of that massive human being and that weight.
In total, Stellan wound up spending around 80 hours in the makeup trailer, being outfitted in a suit that required 7 sculptors and consisted of at least 9 separate pieces for his face, head, neck, and other body parts. This wasn't an easy process for Stellan.
Physically, you have to sit still, straight, for 7 hours.
But it was all worth it in the end to just see how effective the prosthetics were in turning the Baron into a threat. Still, that doesn't mean that there weren't issues with the prosthetics on set, especially when it came to the neck, which, with its massive weights of 25 pounds, had a tendency to buckle if the crew wasn't watching it close enough. But at least Stellan can still act through his facial prosthetics, which is more than we can say for Hugo Weaving. Did you ever notice when Hugo Weaving was recast in Avengers Infinity War? We bet you didn't, because these prosthetics were completely overwhelming. That permanent scowl made it impossible for Hugo to act through them. Though, interestingly enough, that wasn't the reason he decided not to come back for the sequels. That had more to do with disagreements over money, although Hugo had no problem sitting for several hours a day for the makeup process, which was made up of 7 distinct silicone pieces. Hugo even looked back on the process of filming Captain America: The First Avenger as a lot of fun, and we're glad to hear that he enjoyed the makeup more than Christopher did. It just overpowers the character so much that it's the only thing you remember about Red Skull, which is a really bad sign, especially when you see entries like our next one where the prosthetics are more about informing the character than hiding her. Jessica Chastain was completely transformed into Tammy Faye Baker. She had to wear a series of prosthetics in 3 separate stages that would allow her character to age throughout the course of the film. It began with Jessica wearing little more than silicone cheeks and a silicone chin, as well as invisible tape at the end of her nose to make her face look a little bit more like the famous televangelists. But by the end, there had been a lot more than that.
I think the longest day that I was in prosthetics was 7 hours.
Obviously, this wasn't easy on Jessica.
Which really starts to make you feel like you're about to go crazy, you're about to go nuts.
But it went a long way towards making her completely unrecognizable in this role. Alongside her, Andrew Garfield had also been transformed into Tammy's husband, Jim. And the special effects makeup artist drew influence from real archives of the couple, so as to make sure he got every detail right. Between the long hours and the heavy prosthetics, these actors certainly put themselves through a lot for our entertainment. Which one of these movie transformations were you the most surprised by? And are there any other samples that we might have missed? Make sure to let us know down in the comment section.